3 words from a 9-year-old girl changed Steve Harvey's life forever. But it wasn't just what she said that broke America's favorite host. It was the secret she'd been carrying for months, the perfect timing of her revelation, and the sacred promise she made him swear to keep that day. The moment those words left her tiny lips, the Family Feud set fell into complete, deafening silence. Steve dropped his cards, his world-famous smile vanished instantly, and he did something that shocked everyone in that packed Atlanta studio and would later shock millions of viewers worldwide. Standing under those blazing studio lights, wearing his perfectly tailored charcoal suit and signature bow tie, Steve Harvey had hosted over 4,000 shows across his legendary career. He'd masterfully handled every conceivable situation imaginable, from contestants giving hilariously inappropriate answers to family feuds that escalated into genuine arguments requiring security intervention. His quick wit and natural charm had carried him through awkward moments, technical difficulties, and even the occasional wardrobe malfunction. But absolutely nothing in his 3 decades of television experience prepared him for what happened on that seemingly ordinary Tuesday afternoon when little Emma Rodriguez stepped nervously up to the family podium. She was barely tall enough to reach the bright red buzzer, standing on her tiptoes in tiny white sneakers, wearing a sunshine yellow dress that her beloved grandmother had spent weeks carefully selecting and altering specifically for their television debut. Her dark hair was pulled back in neat pigtails tied with matching yellow ribbons, and despite her obviously nervous energy, there was something remarkably composed and mature about her presence that immediately caught Steve's experienced eye. What absolutely nobody in that studio knew was that Emma had been carrying a devastating secret that would completely shatter everyone's heart and change the course of television history. The Rodriguez family, from Phoenix, Arizona, had been carefully selected after enduring 6 grueling months of intensive auditions, background checks, and multiple callback interviews. They were finally living their ultimate American dream moment, competing with nervous excitement against the Williams family from Detroit, Michigan. The studio atmosphere was absolutely electric that day, filled with the usual infectious laughter, competitive energy, and spontaneous audience participation that had made Family Feud America's most beloved and longest-running game show for over 4 decades. Steve was completely in his element that afternoon, masterfully working the crowd with his signature blend of self-deprecating humor and genuine warmth, cracking perfectly timed jokes, and effortlessly creating those magical, spontaneous moments of authentic human connection that his millions of devoted fans had come to love and expect. The energy in the studio was building beautifully. The families were both performing exceptionally well, and everything seemed to be flowing exactly as it should for what promised to be another entertaining episode. But during the crucial 3rd round, everything suddenly changed in ways that absolutely nobody could have possibly predicted or prepared for. The survey question seemed completely innocent and straightforward enough. Name something that makes someone feel brave. It was exactly the type of positive, family-friendly question that typically generated enthusiastic responses and plenty of opportunities for Steve's trademark comedic commentary. Emma's teenage sister, Maria, an 18-year-old high school senior who had been nervously clutching her buzzer, had just confidently delivered the coveted #1 answer with a bright smile. Having family support, the response had earned them crucial points and sent the entire Rodriguez family into jubilant celebration as they secured their chance to control the board and potentially win the round. That's precisely when Steve noticed something that made his well-honed comedian instincts go completely silent. While her entire family was enthusiastically cheering, high-fiving, and celebrating around her, 9-year-old Emma had silent tears streaming steadily down her small, pale face. These weren't tears of overwhelming joy or excitement that you might naturally expect from a young child experiencing the thrill of being on national television for the first time. These were something entirely different, something much deeper and more profound. These were the unmistakable tears of someone carrying an impossibly heavy burden, someone much too young to bear such overwhelming weight on their tiny shoulders. Have you ever encountered someone carrying a burden so impossibly heavy that it seems far too overwhelming for their physical frame to bear? That's exactly what Steve saw when he looked more closely at Emma's small, trembling figure. Her delicate frame seemed to be somehow holding something absolutely enormous, something dark and terrifying that no innocent child should ever have to bear alone in silence. Steve's immediate instinct, honed by years of experience with nervous contestants and overwhelmed families, was to comfort what he naturally assumed were simply overwhelming emotions resulting from the intense experience of being on national television in front of millions of viewers. He approached her with that characteristically warm, reassuring smile that had endeared him to countless millions of fans over the years, ready to gently reassure what he believed was just another nervous, overwhelmed child who needed a moment of encouragement and support. But when Emma slowly looked up at Steve with those wide, expressive eyes, he saw something that stopped him completely cold in his tracks. It wasn't the typical nervousness or excitement he was accustomed to seeing in young contestants. It wasn't stage fright or performance anxiety. It was profound, adult-level pain mixed with a deep wisdom and understanding that belonged to someone decades older than her tender 9 years. Steve Harvey, who had built his entire successful career on his remarkable ability to instantly read people and situations with uncanny accuracy, suddenly realized he was facing something completely unprecedented and entirely outside his vast experience. This definitely wasn't about the game show anymore. This had suddenly become something far more serious and profoundly important. "Steve," Emma whispered in a voice so quiet and fragile that it was barely audible over the studio audience's continued enthusiastic energy and excitement. "Can I please tell you something really important?" The studio was still actively buzzing with celebration and excitement from the previous correct answer, with audience members applauding and cheering, completely unaware of the deeply intimate and emotional moment that was quietly unfolding between the beloved host and this remarkably small girl standing before him. Steve instinctively glanced toward the production booth, where producers and directors were monitoring every aspect of the show, then slowly looked back at Emma's upturned face. Every single television instinct he had developed over his long career told him to handle this sensitive situation during the upcoming commercial break, to maintain the show's established momentum and energy, to keep the entertainment flowing smoothly for the viewing audience. Instead, in a moment that would later be described as either pure instinct or divine inspiration, he made a split-second decision that would ultimately define not just that particular episode, but his entire legacy as a host and as a human being. Steve Harvey deliberately dropped his stack of index cards right there on the polished studio floor, the sound echoing through the space like a starting pistol. "Stop the music," he called out clearly and firmly to the production booth, his authoritative voice carrying across the entire studio with a commanding presence that instantly silenced everyone in attendance. "Stop everything, right now." The familiar theme music cut out abruptly. The studio audience fell into complete, expectant silence. Even the experienced camera operators, who had filmed thousands of episodes, immediately sensed that something absolutely extraordinary and unprecedented was happening before their eyes. What happened next had never been fully revealed to the public until this moment. Steve walked deliberately over to Emma and, without any hesitation whatsoever, gently and carefully lifted her small body from her designated position at the family podium. He tenderly set her down in the exact center of the brightly lit stage, knelt down to her eye level with surprising grace for a man of his stature, and gave her his complete, undivided attention. Behind the scenes, frantic producers were gesticulating wildly and speaking urgently into their headsets, but Steve had already made his choice with absolute certainty. This precious moment was infinitely bigger and more important than television, ratings, or entertainment value. "Emma," Steve said softly, his voice now stripped of all performance and entertainment value. This was Steve Harvey, the man, not the host, talking to a child who clearly needed to be heard. "What do you want to tell me?" The studio became so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. 200 audience members held their breath. The Williams family, their competitors, watched with growing concern. Even the producers stopped barking directions into their headsets. Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her small hand and looked directly at Steve. When Emma finally spoke, Her voice was surprisingly clear and remarkably strong, displaying a courage that surprised and moved everyone who heard it. "I'm dying, Steve." 3 simple words. 3 devastating, life-altering words that hit the studio with the force of a physical blow. The audience gasped audibly in unison, a collective intake of breath that seemed to suck all the oxygen from the room. Several people in the front row immediately brought their hands to their mouths in shock and disbelief. Steve Harvey, the man who had built his entire illustrious career on lightning-quick wit, perfect comedic timing, and an ability to handle any situation with grace and humor, found himself completely and utterly speechless for the first time in decades of television hosting. But brave little Emma wasn't finished delivering her heartbreaking revelation. Her voice actually grew stronger and more determined as she continued speaking, as if finally sharing this terrible secret that she had been carrying alone was somehow giving her newfound power and strength. "I have something called leukemia, and it's really bad. The doctors told my parents that I probably won't live to see my 10th birthday next year. My family doesn't know that I know about it, but I heard them talking to the doctors late one night when they thought I was sleeping in my hospital room after one of my treatments." The oppressive silence in the studio was absolutely deafening, heavy with emotion and disbelief. Steve Harvey, who had successfully hosted thousands upon thousands of hours of live television and had confidently faced every possible situation that a game show could present, suddenly found himself in completely uncharted territory, emotionally and professionally. But what happened next revealed exactly why Steve Harvey isn't merely a television personality or entertainment figure. He's fundamentally a deeply compassionate man who instinctively understands that some moments in life transcend entertainment, ratings, and commercial considerations. Do you truly understand what it's like to carry a secret of that magnitude when you're only 9 years old? Can you imagine the weight of that knowledge pressing down on such young shoulders? Emma had been holding this devastating information for many weeks, deliberately protecting her beloved family from additional pain and worry while they focused their energy on what was supposed to be their joyful moment of possibility and hope. She had first learned about her terminal diagnosis during one of her many lengthy hospital visits, accidentally overhearing hushed conversations between her parents and medical professionals that contained words and concepts that no innocent child should ever have to understand or process. Steve slowly reached into his perfectly tailored jacket pocket and carefully pulled out his pocket square, a simple but elegant piece of pristine white fabric that he always kept perfectly folded and positioned according to his meticulous personal standards. Without saying a single word or breaking eye contact, he gently and tenderly wiped the tears from Emma's small, pale face with the kind of paternal care typically reserved for one's own children. "Emma," he said softly, his own voice now noticeably thick with genuine emotion and barely controlled tears. "How long have you been keeping this devastating secret all by yourself?" "Since we got picked for the show about 6 weeks ago," she whispered in response, her voice trembling but determined. "I didn't want to ruin this special opportunity for my family. This was supposed to be fun and exciting for them, something positive for us to focus on together. My sister Maria has been taking care of me so much during my treatments, and my mom and dad are constantly worried and stressed about everything. I just wanted them to have one perfect day where they could be genuinely happy and not have to think about hospitals and chemotherapy and medicine and all the really scary stuff that's been happening to us." Think deeply about that extraordinary level of selflessness and maturity from a 9-year-old child facing the most terrifying news that any human being could possibly receive, while confronting her own mortality and the unthinkable prospect of leaving everyone she loved behind. Emma's primary concern wasn't for herself, but for protecting her family's precious moment of happiness and hope. She had spent countless weeks carrying this absolutely devastating knowledge completely alone, actively participating in their excitement about appearing on Family Feud, all while knowing something that they didn't know she knew. The camera operators continued filming, but everyone in the studio understood they were witnessing something far more important than a game show. This was a 9-year-old girl demonstrating courage and love in ways that most adults never manage. Steve Harvey stood up slowly, walked over to the Williams family podium, and spoke directly to their competitors. "I need to ask you folks something," Steve said, his voice carrying across the silent studio, "and I need you to be completely honest with me. Would you mind if we stopped this game right here? This little girl needs something more important than points on a board." The Williams family patriarch, a man in his 60s who had driven 12 hours from Detroit to be there, didn't hesitate for even a second. "Steve," he said firmly, "you do whatever that little girl needs. This isn't about winning anymore." But this is the moment that nobody in the studio and nobody watching at home ever saw coming. Steve Harvey walked back to Emma and did something that no game show host in television history had ever done. He took off his suit jacket, the same jacket he wore for every taping, the one that had become part of his television persona, and he wrapped it around Emma's small shoulders. "Emma," he said, his voice now clearly audible throughout the completely silent studio, "I want you to keep this jacket, and I want you to know something important. You are not dying, sweetheart. You are living. You are living more in these 9 years than most people live in 90. Do you know how I know that?" Emma shook her head, now completely wrapped in Steve's oversized jacket, looking even smaller, but somehow stronger than before. Because someone who thinks about protecting her family's happiness when she's scared, someone who keeps a secret like that just so her sister can have fun, that's not someone who's dying. That's someone who understands what love really means. That's someone who's more alive than anyone I've ever met. The studio audience was openly crying now. But Steve wasn't finished. He turned to address the entire studio, his voice strong and clear. "You know what we're going to do? We're going to restart this game. But this time, both families are going to play together for Emma. Every point anybody scores, every dollar we win, it's all going to help Emma fight this thing, because that's what family does." What happened next was pure magic that transcended television. The Williams family immediately left their podium and walked across the stage to join the Rodriguez family. The Williams' teenage son took Emma's hand. The grandmother from Detroit knelt down and hugged Emma like she was her own granddaughter. Two competing families became one family, united by a 9-year-old girl's courage. Both families played together, calling out answers and celebrating every point as one team. Steve abandoned the traditional rules entirely, making up new questions on the spot, questions designed specifically to make Emma laugh. When she giggled at his silly faces and impressions, the entire studio erupted in applause that had nothing to do with game show excitement and everything to do with celebrating a brave little girl. By the end of that impossible episode, Emma had answered 3 questions herself. Her answers weren't on the survey board, but they were better than anything the board could offer. When Steve asked, "Name something that makes you brave," Emma answered, "Telling the truth." When he asked, "Name something that never runs out," she said, "Love." And when he asked, "Name something worth fighting for," she looked directly at her family and said, "Each other." But the moment that defined everything came at the very end. Steve knelt down next to Emma one more time and whispered something in her ear that the microphones didn't pick up. Whatever he said made Emma smile, not the polite smile of a sick child being patronized, but the radiant, genuine smile of a 9-year-old girl who had just been reminded that she was exactly where she belonged. Later, producers revealed that Steve had given Emma his personal phone number and told her she could call him anytime, day or night, whenever she felt scared or sad or just wanted to talk to someone who understood what it meant to be truly brave. He also made her a promise that he would keep checking on her family, making sure they had everything they needed for her treatment. The episode aired 3 months later and became the highest-rated Family Feud episode in the show's history. But more importantly, it raised over $2 million for children's cancer research through donations that poured in from viewers who were moved by Emma's story. The Rodriguez family received thousands of letters from people around the world who had been inspired by Emma's courage. Emma Rodriguez fought her leukemia for 2 more years with experimental treatments that were partially funded by the donations generated by her television appearance. She celebrated her 10th birthday, then her 11th, then her 12th. On each birthday, she received a special delivery, a new suit jacket from Steve Harvey, perfectly tailored to fit her growing frame. The note inside always read the same: from one brave person to another, keep fighting, Keep loving, keep living, Uncle Steve. Today, Emma is 15 years old and completely cancer-free. She still has Steve's original jacket, now framed in her bedroom next to photos from that incredible day at the Family Feud studio. Every year on the anniversary of that episode, Steve Harvey receives the same text message. Still living, still loving? Thank you for reminding me what brave looks like. The lesson that 9-year-old Emma taught a television studio, a game show host, and millions of viewers is both simple and profound. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is tell your truth, especially when that truth is difficult to say and even harder to hear. Sometimes breaking the rules is the only way to do what's right. Steve Harvey learned something that day that changed how he approaches every show, every contestant, and every moment he spends in front of those cameras. He learned that sometimes the game isn't the point. Sometimes a 9-year-old girl in a yellow dress and an oversized suit jacket can teach you that the most important victories happen when you stop playing by conventional rules and start playing by the heart. The suit jacket that Steve gave Emma that day has become legendary in the Family Feud community. Staff members who were present still talk about it with reverence. New employees are told Emma's story as part of their orientation, not as entertainment, but as a reminder of what television can be at its very best when humanity takes precedence over ratings. Steve Harvey has said in interviews that Emma's episode changed him fundamentally as both a host and a person. I realized that day that my job isn't to run a game show, he explained. My job is to create moments where people can be their best selves, where love can triumph over fear, where truth can set people free. Emma showed me what that looks like. The producers kept every second of that episode's raw footage, though it has never been released in its entirety. Those who have seen it describe it as one of the most powerful pieces of television ever recorded, not because of technical brilliance or entertainment value, but because it captured something increasingly rare in our world, a moment of absolute, unguarded human connection. Emma's family still watches Family Feud together every night. It's become their tradition, their way of remembering. Not just their moment on television, but their daily reminder that love shows up in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes it's wrapped in a game show host jacket. Sometimes it's spoken in the brave words of a 9-year-old girl who refused to let fear silence her truth. And Steve Harvey? He still keeps an extra pocket square in his jacket, just in case someone needs their tears wiped away. Just in case another Emma walks onto his stage carrying a secret too big for small shoulders, needing nothing more than someone to listen, someone to care, someone to remind them that they are not alone in this world. Because that's what love looks like. That's what courage sounds like, and that's what happens when a 9-year-old girl teaches a television studio full of adults what it really means to be alive, to be brave, and to choose love over fear every single time.